Good morning, afternoon, actually, here I'm living at. I don't know where you're at today, but it could be still morning for you if you're watching this. I'm Tim Gillette, your host of the Tim Gillette Show. And today I have another great guest, Mr. David Bradley. All right, so I got connected to David through somebody else. I'm going to say, I'm going to find out about this guy just like you on my show. Because, you know what I mean? He's got an interesting story, and I like to bring people on with interesting stories, people who are making changes in the world, all right, and people who use content creation to market their business. So with that, I'm going to bring him on, and we're going to find out all about David Bradley. Hey, David, how are you, man?
Hi, Tim. How are you?
Good, man. Hey, it's good to meet you.
Yeah, right? First time's always the best.
Yeah. It's like literally we all we've done is exchanged emails up until this point, till this day. Literally, it's the first time we're ever meeting, guys.
Right. We got connected through my friend Steve. So
Yep. Steve, good guy. He was one of the first, I think the first or second week we were doing this. All right. And he's like, I've got this guy, David. I'm like, send him over.
So here I am. Excellent. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You bet, man. So David, where do you live at? I mean, I hear you're a Midwester.
I am originally a New Englander, actually, a New England boy. I grew up in New Hampshire, but I have lived in Chicago most of the last, since 1991. So we're going, close to 30 years. So, which tells you a lot.
Yeah.
No, but I really love it. Chicago's a great city. I guess I qualify now as a Midwesterner for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And I absolutely love the city here. I've had three other forays where I've left the city. I moved to Germany, Stuttgart, Germany during the recession of 2008 and worked in Stuttgart for a year with an architecture firm there. And then I was in Fresno, California for about a year. And just came back from 2.5 months in Lisbon, Portugal, which was a self-created, get me the heck out of Chicago winter live-work situation.
Oh, wow.
So I love to travel.
I was going to say, or do you hate winter? Which?
Yeah. Well, no, it's funny. I'm both an architect and a coach, right? Mm-hmm. And I got my training as an architect years ago. That's what actually brought me to Chicago in the first place. I got my architecture master's from University of Illinois at Chicago, and I moved to Chicago sight unseen. I entered architecture without having any idea what I was doing. It just sounded like a cool profession and something that I really wanted to do, right? Mm-hmm. So I moved here, I got my degree, I interned for a number of years, and then I broke off on my own. Ran my own design business for about 10 years. In 2008, the recession hit. I took a look at what I would have to do to actually stay afloat. And I just wasn't in the headspace at the time. I thought, no, this is I got to move on and do something else. Got the job that took me to Stuttgart, Germany. And I worked for and continue to represent a German design company here in the States. Mm-hmm. And they moved me back to Chicago. I've been here for the most part until 2017. I met my partner and moved out to Fresno, California, where he was based. Mm-hmm. And after a year, we decided to go our separate ways, and I planned a month-long road trip to come back to Chicago. And as part of that road trip, I was driving through Portland, Oregon, Seattle, and I turned it into, because I'm a coach, mm-hmm. I also work with a coach. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the ethical thing. If I'm going to be helping people with their stuff, I'm going to work on mine. Mm-hmm. And my coach asked me, he says, how is this not going to be the pity party road trip? And I said, end of a relationship, and I've got to, go back with my tail between my legs. And I said, no, I'm going to turn this into a business opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so I turned it into a month-long project with my coach and declared that I would get back to Chicago in a month, having spent only $1,000 for all of it: food, gas, hotel, transportation, everything. And along the way, I would generate possibilities of working and coaching with architects, which is what I do. Mm-hmm. And I set up meetups in the various cities where I went. I couch surfed. I stayed with friends. I drove my little Fiat over the Rockies dodging blizzards. It was an awesome experience. And I got home and I had spent actually just over $1,000 in that month. It was amazing. It's a great time. But
I did a month on the road in 2010 that, like, I want to say on the bike, and I want to say, yeah, I spent thousands of dollars. It took me years to pay that credit card.
Right?
$1,000. I love it.
This was part of the coaching aspect is, part of coaching is saying, what do you want? And declaring it, like drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is what I'm going to work towards, and then putting the structures in place to make it happen. And I told my coach, I said, I'm going to do this trip and I'm going to make it, it's not going to cost me more than $1,000. And at the time, I had no idea how that was going to happen. No clue, because I started doing the math. I'm like, just the gas alone is going to cost me hundreds, right?
Yeah.
But I started the thing about this is when you declare something, when you put something out there, then when you say yes, then all there is to do is to start taking action and working towards the thing you've said yes to. I gave a presentation about a year ago, not even a year ago, 6 months ago, for the American Institute of Architects Minnesota convention. And the title of the presentation was Designing from, what was it? It was Designing in the Face of No, right? No, spelled K-N-O-W, with the central N-O in parentheses. Because what happens is when we create something in the world, we oftentimes start from what we know. And what we know is the thing that puts no in our way. Like immediately, if I had said, I'm going to make this trip and I'm going to go to Chicago and it's going to cost me $1,000, first thing in my head, well, I can't do that. Like even just the hotel costs are going to put me over that.
Yeah.
And how am I going to pay for food and meals and everything? So immediately I started, and this is just how we're wired. We start with what we know, and the facts and circumstances are the things that actually stop us. So what you do is you declare the result, and then you actually use a process. Some people know it as backcasting, project design from the future. You work from the future achieved goal and you start to move backwards. What would have to happen just prior to that? What would happen prior to that? And you work your way back from that visualized goal to where you actually are right in the here and now. And then you just flip it and you start working on those milestones. But if you start from what you know, this is where most of my clients and most of the people I run into get stopped, is I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough resources. They always start with what seems like a reality. Once I created this project, then all there was to do is to make it happen and get creative. And that's when I thought, I could do couch surfing. It's free right immediately there. And I met some of the coolest people. A banjo player for a band in Missoula, Montana, a park ranger in Billings, this chemical engineer in Bismarck, North Dakota. I stayed with friends and reconnected with people. There were a million different ways that I could make this thing happen. On that trip, so I get back, I'm successful. I've done what I said, right? On that trip, I was in St. Paul, Minnesota, staying with a friend whom I hadn't seen in 15, 18 years. We reconnected enough so that I was helping her shovel 3 new feet of snow off of her back porch.
Wow.
And I looked around and I thought, God, this is so beautiful. After a snow falls, crisp, crystal clear, it's fresh air, sun's out, and I'm sweating bullets in a parka and a cap and I just looked around and I thought, God, this is so beautiful. And the next thought in my head was, and I'm done. I'm just done. I'm done with winter. I'm not going to do this anymore. I've lived my whole life in the northern tier of the US. I've been through every snowpocalypse and snowmageddon and polar vortex and all of it. I have nothing to prove. And I just told myself as I drove from Minneapolis back to Chicago, I said, I will not spend the winter in Chicago. And I have no idea how that's going to happen. And I told my coach, and he said, great, what's the declaration? I said, I will not be in Chicago. I'm going to go away for 3 months. I'm just going to get out of here. And I started putting it together as a project. Again, starting from the final realized goal and then just working my way backwards to where I was. What's amazing is the minute I started to share it with people, resources started popping up everywhere. And I started creating the thing.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens, what's interesting, I'm sharing this for a reason,
Mm-hmm.
because even as a coach, you get stopped, right? I'm human.
Oh, yeah.
And around August, another coach friend of mine, we were on a call together and we were doing sort of an accountability call. And she says, "What are you working on today?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to look into healthcare possibilities for when I'm abroad."
Mm-hmm.
And I had already decided that I wanted to go to Lisbon.
Mm-hmm.
Something was calling me to go there. And she kind of wrinkled up her nose. She goes, "Healthcare? When are you going to buy the ticket? That's actually the thing that's going to get you invested."
Yeah.
And I hated her for pointing to it. But I was kind of playing tiddlywinks with this whole thing. A week later, I picked up the phone and I called and I got a ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And the minute I got the ticket, I went from being the guy who was thinking of going to Lisbon to the guy who was going to Lisbon.
Mm-hmm.
There was this shift from talking in what I call wallowing in maybiness. Well, I'm hoping to go to Lisbon. I'm thinking of going to Lisbon. I'm intending to go to Lisbon.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody I talked to that way, it wasn't very powerful. But the minute I bought the ticket and committed myself to it, all of a sudden I walked into a cocktail party and they said, "So what's up?" And I said, "I'm moving to Lisbon." And man, the power surge that gave me was incredible, right? Mm-hmm. People started giving me referrals. "Oh, you got to meet this person. You got to go to this place." Like, it was amazing when I fully committed how the universe, the resources that just came pouring in from that commitment were just overwhelming. Mm-hmm. I left on January 7th. I flew to Lisbon. I had an Airbnb for 3 months. Mm-hmm. I started learning Portuguese. I set myself up using the internet, doing my coaching just the way we're doing here. And it was an amazing experience. Unfortunately, I got thrown back here because of the coronavirus. Mm-hmm. So that's got me back in Chicago.
Yeah, but I mean, in your life, David, how many times have you found it to be, you know what I mean? Once I make the decision and take that first step, everything becomes easier. Have you found that?
So much easier. Yeah, absolutely. Because here's the deal too. Now, it's very similar in a lot of ways. I actually never thought about this. I knew when I was very young, I knew I was gay. Mm-hmm. And I didn't come out to my dad for years because I was absolutely terrified. And what I realized finally, I was in my early 40s, and I realized I'm spending all this energy fighting 500 scenarios of how it could go, mm-hmm. rather than actually just being with the one scenario that ends up happening.
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
The minute I told him everything, it's like there was such a waste of energy being put into the what if, mm-hmm. that simply choosing and committing, and it went incredibly well. I couldn't have asked for better.
And how did he accept it well and everything?
Oh, yeah. My God, he was amazing. But mm-hmm. He was phenomenal. He just told me to take the weight off my shoulders. Mm-hmm. It was a beautiful, beautiful moment for the two of us, and it shifted our whole relationship. Mm-hmm. But prior to that, we weren't extremely close, and mm-hmm. I didn't know if he'd come after me with a shotgun or if he would throw a parade, mm-hmm. or if there were so many different options, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the same with when you commit. That's the thing that I see in what's going on today with the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. Is that everybody's been thrown into a situation with a ton of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And we're all wondering, we're all kind of swimming in the what ifs. What if we can't go back to work for 2 months? What if I get it? What if the people I know get it? What if somebody died? There's so many questions. What I'm really working with, both with my coach for myself and also with my clients, is who do you want to be when this lands? Mm-hmm. And focus on that. Make that decision about where you want to land when this is all over. at a really high altitude level, who is the person that you want to be, and act in alignment with that. Start being in integrity with that. All of this other stuff is going to work itself out. But if you can manage to anchor yourself and plant yourself in that idea of where you want to be and what you want to become, make that decision and act accordingly.
That's you see, it's a writer downer there. I call them writer downers. That's a writer downer right there, guys. I'll be quoting you on social media on that one. Oh my God. So yeah, in this, and I found that's why I went back to asking you that question about once you committed, and I mean, I want to kind of dip into that. You know what I mean? Your relationship with your dad, you said, improved the second you came out to him and said, "Dad, I'm gay."
Oh yeah.
I don't know your exact words that you used in that, but how many times do you have clients who you see fighting? It may not be that they need to come out as gay. Maybe it's deciding to start a business or something. They're fighting that same thing. And you want to go, I've been through this.
No, it's absolutely true. And it happens on micro levels, macro levels. Like, people are constantly up against fear. Right? It really is about fear. It's about who are we when we're confronted by the fear of doing something. We're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of change. We're afraid of consequence. Fear is probably one of the most detrimental things that's out there. And I have clients who are afraid of having a conversation with their colleague or with their boss. I have clients who are afraid of striking out on their own and starting up their own practice with their own business. Sometimes it's a fear of success. It's not even a fear of failure. It's like, oh my God, what if I actually succeeded? I may have to keep it up. That's going to suck, right? Yeah. So there's that fear that people trying to get people to, well, I'm going to put it this way. The job of a coach isn't to tell people what to do. It's to work in partnership in a conversation with them so that they can unravel and unwrap the things that they already know to do by looking at the different behaviors, the patterns, the speaking, all of the stuff that's in the way of them living powerfully, right? Yeah. And so a lot of my job with folks is in conversation to get them to see what's going on, to shine a light. And the best moments of what I do are when you see the light bulb go on and somebody's like, oh my God, that's why I've been doing this thing. Or, oh my God, that's the thing that's been in the way. And if you can uncover the thing that's in the way and get them to see the path forward, then the fear, it doesn't really matter because they've got the commitment and they know what's on the other side. And even when they don't know what's on the other side, they still have enough conviction to be able to move themselves forward.
It's almost like taking that step gives you the faith to trust that what's on the other side isn't going to kill you. Am I saying that right? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And sometimes you got to start small, right? I think that's part of the project design process too, is a lot of people look at big things and say, well, I just couldn't, they get overwhelmed immediately. Oh, I couldn't possibly take that on, right? Somebody comes to me and they say, well, I want to have a 6-figure business, but I'm making 25 grand right now doing whatever else, right? Yeah. You want to start to the point where, okay, so let's get you making 30, right? Yeah. We're not gonna just leap into the big leagues all of a sudden in one fell swoop, because people, it's probably unrealistic. B, people are, they get overwhelmed and they kind of get paralyzed. And so with a lot of things, it's about a step-by-step, incrementally, but inexorably moving forward towards that thing that you want. And if you can get people in motion and they start to see wins, even small ones, it gives them the faith and the trust that they can actually move forward towards the larger goal.
So, David, I assume your process of getting here and figuring this out wasn't, you know what I mean? It wasn't a direct path for you. I'm sure it was a step-by-step based on what you've shared. Well, let me ask you, is there like someone in your past, like a mentor or something who gave you a writer downer that went, man, and that was the moment or something that not only it clicks you forward, but every time you look back, you go, yep, that's the division moment when I step forward.
Yep. The very first one that comes to mind, I mentioned I moved to Chicago sight unseen, started architecture. I was going into architecture because a Peace Corps recruiter had said, they wanted to send me to teach English somewhere. I applied, and the guy said, we'll send you to any country in the world to teach English. And I thought, well, that's not a career move. I was 23 and I needed to be making a move. And I said, what would you do? He says, well, you've got a great international background, liberal arts degree. I would get a master's to pair with it. And I went home and I looked up professional degrees, and the only one of them that really kind of sparked anything for me was architecture. But I had never drawn. I had never had expressed any interest in buildings. I had never, this was just out of the ordinary. And I applied to 5 schools that required no portfolio because they were designed for people changing careers. And I showed up, I got a fellowship for UIC based on my grades, and showed up here terrified because I had this story in my head. I can't design. I don't know how to draw. Why am I even here? But I was interested by the subject matter. On my first studio, I was surrounded by people who were doing these absolutely beautiful artistic renderings and sketches and watercolors. I mean, just amazing drawings of buildings and concepts. And I couldn't draw my way out of a paper bag. I was doing like box diagrams of things. And the third day of this one studio, we'd been given this project. And my instructor, David Leary, he came over and he said, so David, what's going on? I'm not seeing anything here. And I was almost in tears. And I was so frustrated. I said, I can't, it's in my head. I can't draw it. I just don't have the skill to draw it. I don't think I belong here. And he looked around and he just looked at me and he said, so build it. And he walked away. And I grabbed a hot glue gun and some balsa wood and some paper and some cardboard. And next day he shows up and he looks at me and I've got a model in my hands. And he says, so what do you got? And I said, well, so you go in here and then this thing does that. And I was totally able to show him my vision for what I wanted. And I looked over and he's grinning from ear to ear and he says, now draw it. And those words kept me in architecture school. It was a moment where I realized that everyone has a different modality. Everybody has different access to their own brilliance. And without tooting my own horn, it turns out I was just as good a designer as anybody else in that studio. I just hadn't found my medium to express myself. And once I did, I got an A in the studio. Wow. I mean, it was really brilliant. It was wonderful. And I still, to this day, I take that because when I work with my clients, architects are some of the most gifted people I know. It's a noble profession. They're uniquely trained to create possibility where none exists. And as a coach, I'm uniquely trained to create possibility where none exists. So the marriage of those two is really great. But I also shift my style and my listening and my speaking according to meeting the people where they're at. Because that one thing taught me that just because you can't do a particular thing doesn't mean you don't have access to your brilliance in a different way. So that's the best example I could give you.
And it's funny that you mentioned that is like I went to when I was in high school. I was in I think it was a drafting class like in one school. And then my father put me in a Votech school class to finish out high school.
Yep.
And I so can imagine all the stuff you're doing with, because I had to learn to draw things. And for me, I didn't want to sit and draw, how to do the pen. It was a mechanical drawing class.
Yeah.
I love cars.
Uh-huh.
So I would take all the instruments to draw mechanical drafting, and would take a picture of a car, and I would figure out how to draw that car on the paper.
Right.
All right. And it's almost like the same thing what you did with, build it first and then draw it. All right. And because brought your creativity, that brought the creativity out. How many times with helping clients do you have to go, okay, wait a minute, we got to reverse this process? No, we've got to put a weird kink in this to make this work.
Yeah.
How often? I'm just curious. How often does that happen?
Well, every single client, because they're all so brilliantly unique. I mean, this is the wonderful thing about humanity, right? Is we all have a different muse. We all have a different way of being. So I have one client that I know that if I, and I know this just from having gotten to know her, right? I know that if I can bring any element of hands-on, like physical, or any element of play, anything that turns it into a game, it's like fireworks go off, right? And you can see it, but she's not so great with, absolutely brilliant, but not so great when it comes to writing stuff down. She writes it all down, but in the process of writing everything down, like journaling, it actually disconnects this from this.
Wow.
She disconnect, and you can see it. She'll send me something and say, I did all of this writing and I've got this outline and everything else, and I can't quite figure out, but it doesn't feel right. And I wrote her back and I said, because it doesn't have any of you in it. And I got a text back that said, damn you. But it was, so everybody has something different. There's a key to unlock. Some people are extremely analytical, and so they're great in, hey, I want you to go take this business plan and put it into some spreadsheets. And that's how they access their own brilliance and success. Yeah. There's other people. I worked with a married couple out in Seattle who started their own firm together. And one of the exercises we talked about was writing a vision statement of what they wanted to do. It didn't go so well. But they started a Pinterest board and started just putting up all of these different images that represented the kind of firm that they wanted to create and the kind of architecture they wanted to go. And it was hugely successful. It gave them inspiration. It's the fun part of what I get to do is it's such an interpersonal experience with finding people's brilliance, celebrating who they are, pointing sometimes to the things that are in the way, right, as much as possible. The cool thing about being both an architect and a coach, I've got some street cred because I've walked in their shoes. B, I get to tell them everything that their friends and family won't, right? The cool thing about being a coach is you get to be brutally honest with people from heart, like with compassion, but you get to say the bold thing. You get to say the thing that nobody else is going to tell them because they don't want to hurt their feelings or they don't want to, ruin the relationship. One of my mentors said, you should go into every coaching session expecting to get fired because you're going to tell them stuff that they're not going to want to hear. Yeah. But that's why I get hired, because once you point to the stuff and do it gently, but firmly, you can say, hey, I just noticed that when you're talking about such and such, this keeps showing up. What's that about? Right. And allow them to process and see it. So there's so much of coaching that turns the mirror around so that they get to see themselves. You reflect back to people who they're being and who they are. And sometimes
it's a wake-up call for them too. Yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes it's a wake-up call. Sometimes too, and I'm gonna add this. It's not always pointing to the flaws
Yeah.
or pointing to the right. One of the most powerful practices that I learned in my coach training was acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of every call with my client, we do a VMA. The V is what's the value that you created, so that they actually get to acknowledge what they've come up with during the call.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is anything. M is anything missing, disempowering, or incomplete for you. And that's just a chance to tie up any loose ends. And if something I said landed wrong or there's something missing, we can clean it up. But the third one, the A, is acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm.
People in this world are not acknowledged enough,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not acknowledged for who they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're acknowledged for what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question I always ask them is, who do you like to be acknowledged for being?
Mm-hmm.
Universally, the first time I ask that question, there's just absolute confusion on the other side. And I'll grant, it's because it's a pretty coachy kind of question, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not language that you would use out in the daily world. But when they start to get it, acknowledgement is one of the most powerful things that we could bring to each other. And especially in this time of physical separation and a lack of connection, is to acknowledge people for who they're being, because they never get them, they never have themselves reflected as who they are from their essence, like from their beauty. They never get that.
Yeah.
And then B, the person who's doing the acknowledging, you have to also kind of get to the core of who you are as a human being in order to acknowledge the person. You can't acknowledge somebody authentically from just from rote. So it requires that there be a connection in a relationship. And I have had people after acknowledgements almost in tears. And it's a beautifully powerful thing, because I get to celebrate my clients
Mm-hmm.
and everything that they're up to, but I really get to celebrate them as human beings.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh, it's like magic.
Yeah.
Super cool.
So, I mean, you know what I mean? I always like to find out when I talk with people, all right, that, you know what I mean? If they had a mentor that connects in, all right, if they're connecting now with their clients the same way, and I've almost always find a direct link into doing it. It's always an experience that you know, that they got, that they're taking into their coaching. Now, I mean, we're actually on a podcast here, and I actually come out and I actually market online. What are you doing online right now to market that, to get that message out there to people? Are you doing podcasts, blogs, things like that? What are you doing?
I've started just this winter. When I went to Lisbon, actually, I started a YouTube channel where I'm putting up, 10, 12, 13-minute videos about whatever happens to be in my mind. But usually it's about coaching concepts or tools that people can use. One of the things that I've put up is I'm sharing a project that I've taken on with my coach, so that people can actually see the progress that I go through, both the ups and the downs. I have an email newsletter that goes out on a weekly basis. I'm doing some stuff on Instagram and Facebook and posting. I also have a group on LinkedIn called the Global Architects Leadership Forum.
Cool.
So trying to up my game on social media. It's definitely a change, but a challenge being constantly on there. I'm sure you know.
I know.
But yeah.
But
I'm doing it.
I was going to ask you, honestly, all right, do you like doing it?
Yes and no. I actually have gotten to the point, I like making the videos, and part of it is because I feel like it's the best way for me to authentically express myself. I prefer actually doing stuff like this, one-on-one with somebody where it's a conversation, rather than me lecturing to people on a YouTube or something. I love sharing on Instagram. I love sharing pictures of places I've been and thoughts that I've had. My experience in Lisbon was just magical that way, because there was just so much to soak in. I'm a little less enthused, I think, about daily posting on social media. just because I really want what I'm putting out there to have some authentic meaning for me, and hopefully for everybody else. So I'm trying not to put stuff out there that's just filler.
Yeah.
Right? That's
And
the hard part.
it can be that way. And like, I mean, I hated stuff that they told me in the beginning, and I hated it. All right. And now it's like, now because I actually had to accept it and do it, that like, I hate putting pictures of me up.
Yeah.
I want pictures of something else, not me.
Right. Right.
And I hate that, but it's part of the thing. I don't want to be on camera, but I have to.
Well, and I think the other thing that's hard
Yeah.
with online presence and social media is things like YouTube and LinkedIn. You get some sense of how you're connecting with people, but oftentimes it also, you can fall into feeling like you're shouting into a well. Is anybody really watching these? Is anybody really getting anything out of this? Am I just wasting my time? Right. And I've had 2 or 3, even in the past month or so, I've had 2 or 3 people who've come to me and say, "Hey, I watched your videos, and like, I really look forward to those. It's really great. It's making a difference for me." And that spurred me on. That being said, I'm behind by about a month because of the whole COVID and moving from Lisbon and everything else. So I'm going to be making a note to myself to get myself back on YouTube.
So, I mean, but let me relate it to architecture and stuff like that. Is, I mean, it's almost like you're having to create, a whole, design a whole building, design a whole project. It's like almost the same thing, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's I kind of look at my coaching and architecture in very similar ways. Like there's a foundation that you have to set. There's a framework that you have to build. There's finishing touches that you put on around everything else. So there's a structure to both. But I think the social media stuff has become part of the foundation. It's really something that you just have to be out there and you have to be doing. So gotta love it.
So, let me, I didn't get a chance to ask this, and I kind of want to know it, is what kind of architecture do you work? Is it like homes or large buildings?
Oh gosh. When I ran my own business here in Chicago, I did high-end residential and light commercial work. So, at the time, there was a ton of condo conversions from apartments to condos, and I had fallen in with a group of developers that were doing that. So that was kind of our bread and butter. But we also did some higher end residential stuff on the north side of Chicago and the North Shore, and then some interesting projects like a bar down on Diversey, a men's day spa up in Andersonville, a computer science lab down at the University of Chicago. So it started to diversify quite a bit. Once I closed my firm and I moved to Germany, the company that I designed with there, it's a very small firm. It's anywhere from 3 to 6 people, depending on the workload. The name is Officium. And Officium specializes in the design of tensile structures. Tensile structures are all under tensions made with stainless steel cable, stainless steel mesh, and as opposed to a compressive structure, which would be like wood and brick, because they're under the compressive force of the building's weight itself. Tensile stuff is all pulled taut. The best example is my firm designed the suicide prevention barrier for the Golden Gate Bridge that is currently being built. And it's these wire mesh nets being hung off the sides of the bridge, extending about 20 feet out and 20 feet down from the car deck. We did that there. We did 7 similar fall protection, bridge protection projects on Ithaca, New York's Cornell campus. I've done some art sculpture. So there's this, if you ever fly through Atlanta Hartsfield International Terminal.
Yeah.
Not today, not these days.
Not today, but who hasn't flown through it?
If you come through up the escalator into their Terminal F, there's a huge mesh chandelier that's got, I think it's 4,800 pieces of Swarovski crystal hanging off of it, strafed with lights.
Mm-hmm.
And that mesh substrate was all our design.
Oh, cool.
We've used it to do green facades on buildings, sculptures, safety applications. So this is one of the questions I get asked at a cocktail party is, I say I'm an architect, and people say, oh, residential or commercial?
Mm-hmm.
And I tell them to get another drink, and I'll explain what I really do.
Yeah.
Because, as may have happened here, their eyes kind of glaze over because they're like, I don't know what this guy's talking about. It's unique. It's niche. And but I love it because it's taken me all over the world. Here's one you'll love. This is actually what took me down to California, is we designed, do you know Kelly Slater?
I'm not sure. That name sounds familiar.
Yeah, world famous surfing champion.
Okay.
He bought a property in Lemoore, California, which is like 200 miles in from the coast,
Mm-hmm.
an old Navy training facility with a dive pool, and he converted the pool into an R&D facility to create a man-made barrel wave.
Mm.
And there's a machine, it's like a ship's prow,
Mm-hmm.
that's pulled along a track, and the wake, they basically poured the concrete of the surface under the water so that the wake creates a barrel wave that just continues down the length of the pool that surfers can ride, right? Mm-hmm. So man-made waves, consistent, and this was his R&D facility because the intention was, and I think still is, to open these wave pools all over the world and create a surfing circuit mm-hmm. on man-made waves. But of course, it's bad for business if your surfers get sucked under the prow of this ship.
Wow. Yeah.
So my firm was brought in to design a mesh barrier that was 25 feet high and 2,000 feet long. Mm-hmm. To prevent the surfers from interacting with the wave-making technology.
Cool.
I do weird work.
I guess so, but I mean, it's got purpose.
But it's fun.
Well, David, first of all, I mean, I appreciate you coming on today. I want to make sure that everybody sees and hears your website so they can find you, because I have listeners who would like to find my guests. So why don't you tell them what it is so we have it both on the audio and the video?
Please do. You can visit me at www.blueprintforliving.coach. Not .com, .coach.
Coach. Okay. Cool.
And check out the stuff that's there. And there's all sorts of opportunities to have a conversation. So happy to do it.
Cool. So, David, I like to close out my show with a little game I call This or That. I don't know if you've watched some of our episodes to see we play this game.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
I've made up a list here of about 9 questions that I want to find out about David.
All right.
Let's start with this one because I'm not sure you're this type of person, but Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh, gosh. I have to choose one, huh?
Yeah.
Star Trek.
Star Trek?
Yeah.
So that would make you a chip. Now you have to choose Kirk or Picard.
Oh, Picard. Absolutely.
So the next one here, because you're an East Coast but yet Central guy, is if you had to go get pizza, New York style or Chicago?
New York.
But you live in Chicago. I love it.
I do, but I just, you know what? It's good, but I prefer thin crust pizza.
I do too. I love New York pizza.
It's like, I'm going to get myself in so much trouble.
Yeah. So it's okay. So this one here is kind of an architecture question.
All right.
Empire State Building or the Sears Tower? Which one's the better building?
I got to say the Sears Tower, honestly.
Is that, and why? I'm curious. Why?
Because it was innovative for its time and the way they bundled the tubes to get the height that they wanted. Mm-hmm. And because it's in my hometown here, and because I've been on the ledge. I don't know if you know the ledge that's on the 104th floor, I think it is. Yeah. Or it's a plexiglass box that you can step out and look straight down to the street below.
Yeah.
Empire State Building, This is embarrassing. I've been in the building, but I have not been to the observation deck.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for a meeting. So I got to go with the hometown on that one.
See, I've not been to the Sears Tower, right, to go up and do it, but I have been to the Empire State Building, and I actually was, as a kid, I was up in the old, the World Trade Center, up on the observation deck as well. And yeah, there's so many things that are out there. I've not been to the one in Chicago, the Sears Tower. So that's something.
Oh yeah, definitely worth going just to go out on that the ledge.
Yeah.
But I will say a better view is from the 96th floor of the Hancock Building, the bar at the top.
Ah.
Yeah, it's cheaper. Yeah. It's a better view, and you get to sit down and actually watch the sunset and the lights of the city come up. I take anybody who's never been to Chicago. Yeah. I take them there, and we go there the first night so they can just get a view of what a beautiful place this is.
We're gonna have to go. My wife and I, next time she ropes me to Chicago, we're gonna have to check that out.
You look me up, I'll take you.
Yeah, yep. So number 4 on the list is: would you rather read a book or listen to a podcast?
Listen to a book.
Listen to a book. Well, it could be the same thing as podcast. Same thing. Yeah. Read or listen. So yeah.
Yeah.
Some people would rather listen to it than.
I love reading, and I when audiobooks first came out, I was just the Kindle, and I was like, no, I like real books. I like real books. But I was traveling so much that the Kindle made sense, and now I listen whenever I'm mobile. It's like I step out the door, first thing that pops on, and it's usually a book. Usually science fiction for me.
Yeah, I used to listen to books on tape, like when I drove truck in the early 90s.
Yeah,
I used to pop the cassette tape into the book, and literally, as truck drivers, we used to be able to rent them from one truck stop and drop them off at another. It was weird.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So this one here is kind of a southern versus northern thing: taco or hamburger.
It's hamburger.
Hamburger. I will gladly pay you on Tuesday for a hamburger today. How about wine or beer?
Wine.
Red or white?
Red.
Any favorite places you go to get it?
I actually really like cheap red wine. Well, no, there are people out there. Yes, there's times when you can spend a lot of money on a nice bottle of wine, but there are a lot of really great wines that come from different vineyards that, you don't need to spend more than $15-20 and you'll get a good wine. Yeah. I like beer, but I just can't do too much of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I've got 2 more left. This next one here could create a war right now if you have it. Some people may not have it to have this war, but toilet paper, under or over?
Over. Yeah.
You have to go back and watch last Monday's podcast where a girl actually said, if I'm start dating a guy and I go to his house after the 3rd time of switching the toilet paper, I break up with him.
It's a very divisive issue of our time.
It is. That's why I have to have it in there. I've got to find out.
Red state, blue state, over and under.
So in our last one here, boxers or briefs?
Boxers.
Boxers?
Yeah. I think
it wasn't that hard.
That wasn't that bad. I feel like my integrity is still intact.
Well, David, I appreciate you coming on the show today. One more time, tell everybody your website so they can get a hold of you.
You got it. So www.blueprintforliving.coach.
Blueprintforliving.coach. So
drop me a line. Let me know that you're out there. I'd love to hear from people.
And guys, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Anchor FM. We're at Tim Gillette, and follow us on Facebook. I'm Tim Gillette with the Tim Gillette Show. Thank you, David Bradley, for coming in and spending time with us today. All right, we'll be back with another episode real soon. I'm Tim Gillette with the Tim Gillette Show. I'll see you next time, guys. Bye. Peace.